Amy joined the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation in June 2024 to coordinate the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas in Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. The goal of the project is to engage with agency partners and community scientists to gather data on bumblebee distribution and habitat needs across the region. Amy has a bachelor's degree in bio from Wisconsin Lutheran College and a master's in entomology from Montana State. Her master's project was insects associated with huckleberries in Montana and the bumblebees of Montana. Much of her career has been spent in education as a middle and high school science teacher, outdoor educator, and youth crew leader. Amy enjoys hiking, reading, and learning, and is excited to explore the diverse landscapes of mountain states while connecting with new people and sharing her love of bumblebees. Amy does need volunteers. So as we listen, we'll be thinking about how we might personally engage in this. And as a reason why I took note of your chapters is because ideally, the next step would be that we get out and do it together, and we have a chapter event. So without further ado, thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Maggie, for that introduction. Thanks to everyone who is spending a little time this evening with us. I'm excited to be with you virtually tonight. I'm joining you from Grand Junction, where we had kind of a blustery, rainy, snowy, hail-filled day, getting some much-needed moisture over here on the western slope. So tonight I'm going to share with you some information about one of my favorite animals, Colorado's amazing bumblebees, with a little information about why they need our help and what we can do to help them. And then I will share some information about the Atlas. I am the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas Coordinator, so the end of the presentation will be about that. And that's really where, if you want to engage in this work, we would love to have you as volunteers. And there's kind of some different levels that you could participate as a volunteer. So if you are not familiar with the Xerces Society, we are a science-based nonprofit organization. Our home office is in Portland, Oregon, and we have been in an organization since the 1970s. And everything that we do is about conservation for invertebrates and protecting the habitats that support them. We recognize that invertebrates are the often forgotten but vitally important organisms on Earth in every ecosystem. And so we do a lot of work, research, education, outreach, advocacy, all about protecting this invertebrate life that sustains us. We are a donor-supported organization, so if you are a member of the Xerces Society, I just want to take this moment to thank you for your support. If you are not yet a member of the Xerces Society, I'd encourage you to go to xerces.org and just learn more about what we do. There are also a lot of different resources that are available that are just interesting to learn about, like this whole world of invertebrates. There's a whole resource library of PDFs, free downloads. There's YouTube videos, there's a podcast, there's a blog. There's just a lot of great information that I would encourage you to check out. So tonight for this presentation, I'm going to walk through the importance and diversity of bumblebees, talk a little bit about their biology and adaptations, what make them so unique and so important. Their conservation concerns, so why are we concerned about them, and then what we can do to help. And I like to start with this picture. You heard a little bit about my background, that I was a teacher and went back to school to get my master's in entomology. And this picture that's on the screen right now just kind of captures my time at Montana State. That's a huckleberry flower, and that is one of the bumblebees that pollinates it. That is the time where I fell in love with bumblebees. I was teaching high school science in Arizona, and I did a 2-week all day, every day intensive is what we called it. It was an elective that was for high school students. And so we spent 2 weeks learning about entomology. And I had high school students with nets chasing insects and getting super excited, like, Miss Dolan, I just found Coleoptera. And they were very excited. But of all of them, I think that I fell in love with insects the most because that's what sparked me to go back to school and to get my master's degree in entomology. And that just started me down this meandering path of learning about native bees, falling in love with bumblebees, and then wanting to do this work to help to support their populations and help their populations recover. So the first question, big picture, is why are bees important? Why are we doing this work? And I'm speaking to the Native Plant Society, so you know the answer to this. The answer is all about pollination. Bumblebees, all bees are pollinators, and this is all about reproducing, plants reproducing, moving those male cells in the pollen to the female parts of the flower. Plants can reproduce, or they can be pollinated by wind or by water. They can self-pollinate, but most plants benefit from or require some sort of an animal pollinator to help them with that reproduction. Pollinator animals, the animals that are pollinators could be many different things, from birds like hummingbirds to mammals like bats, but most of our pollinator animals are insects, from moths and butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, and of course, bees. So why does it matter? Why should we care about these animal pollinators, these insect pollinators? And a lot of times the answer brings us to our food. 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat is courtesy of insect pollination. Without our insect pollinators, we wouldn't starve to death. We wouldn't be without food, but we would be without a lot of the foods that we enjoy, like our fruits and seeds and nuts and things like that. Also thinking about just these beautiful wild landscapes that we like to enjoy when we go out on hikes. 90% of the world's wild plants depend on pollinators to reproduce. And so just all of these plants out in these different ecosystems, they really need these pollinators. And while we often think about pollinators in relation to human needs and human foods, the pollinators provide so much more than human food. So the seeds and the nuts and the berries that are produced as plants are reproducing provide food for small mammals and birds, kind of at the base of the food chain, all the way up to grizzly bears. I met a grizzly bear biologist in Glacier National Park who now spends most of her time doing bumblebee research, because she made that connection between the huckleberries that the grizzly bears rely on as they're building up fat stores for winter hibernation, and the bumblebees that pollinate them. So everything in these ecosystems is really connected. Pollinators also provide habitat, thinking about where would so many different creatures live if there weren't plants for shelter. And then sometimes we might even forget that the pollinators themselves can be food. So this chickadee here has a little baby pollinator in its mouth, and that is a vital part of the food webs in our ecosystems as well, is these pollinators are able to take the energy that's stored in plants and pass it on through those trophic levels to other animals further down the food chain. Because of this, we consider pollinators keystone species, which means that every ecosystem on Earth would be drastically different if pollinators weren't there. So they're vitally important in every ecosystem on Earth. Of all of these pollinators, bees are the most efficient. And the reason why that is this word intentionally. There's a lot of organisms that will be on flowers, feeding on the nectar, feeding on the pollen, using the flowers for different things. But bees are intentionally collecting and transporting pollen because they are plant eaters. They are vegetarians. They feed on pollen for protein and feed pollen as protein to larvae. They feed on nectar as a carbohydrate for energy, and they take that back to the nest for their larvae as well. So bees are intentionally collecting and transporting pollen, and as they move from flower to flower, they're not intentionally pollinating the plants, but they are accidentally moving pollen as they intentionally transport pollen. Every bee species has different types of pollen collecting hairs or body structures. So common honeybees and bumblebees are some of our most commonly known bees. They have what we call corbicula or pollen basket on the hind leg. It's a shiny concave section of the back leg, and that's where they pack pollen and nectar together in a ball, and they carry it around on their back legs like that. Other bee species like mason bees or leaf-cutting bees, they have specialized hairs on the underside of their abdomen where the pollen gets packed and carried. Other bees like digger bees and longhorn bees, sunflower bees, they have specialized hairs on their back legs where they can pack the pollen into those hairs to carry it. And then sometimes there's some species of bees that are a little bit tricky and they don't even look like bees. Like this little black bee in the picture on the right, looks almost more like a wasp because it's not hairy like what we expect bees to be. But this female bee, she actually carries the pollen and nectar inside of her body in her crop, and she will regurgitate it when she gets back to the nest for her offspring. And so she doesn't have external pollen carrying structures, but she does have an internal pollen carrying structure. The other thing that makes bees really effective pollinators for many different types of plants is a behavior that called flower constancy. So that means that even if a bee is a generalist, which means they are happy foraging on lots of different species of plants, typically on any one pollinating trip. So when they go from the nest flower to flower to flower before they go back to the nest, they tend to stick to one type of flower. For the bee, that makes sense because they don't have to learn how to extract the pollen and nectar from a bunch of different flowers. They're more efficient if it's the same type of flower. And that works out really well for the plants that are getting pollinated because that means that at any given time, most of the pollen on a bee is going to be from the same type of flower. Um, this is a statistic that a lot of people are not aware of, and I was blown away when I first learned this because I did not know that there were so many different species of bees. In the world, there are over 20,000 species of bees, and there are lots of species that we have not yet discovered or that have been discovered but haven't been described. In North America, there's 3,600 different species of bees, and in Colorado, we're over 1,000 now. I think the number is, I think 1,007 is what the people at the museum in Boulder told me last summer. So Colorado is a great place for bee diversity. And when you think about bees, they're not all the stereotypical black and yellow stripes. They can be lots of different colors, lots of different sizes, lots of different shapes. Some are shiny and green, some are iridescent blue or purple. Some are super tiny, and some can be really big. And so there's just this amazing diversity of bees that exist in nature that are fun to learn about. And there is so much that we still need to learn about the bees. They're not super easy to study, they're not very easy to identify, and there's a lot that we don't know. When we think about all of the different living things, biologists like to classify things, as plant lovers know. So all bees are part of the order Hymenoptera. So their closest relatives are wasps and ants and sawflies. There are 7 families of bees found across the world. 6 of those can be found in North America. The 7th family is only known from Australia. So these are the 6 families of bees, and we can find all of them in Colorado. The first 5 are much more common. This last family is a little bit less common. If we zoom in then to the bumblebees, all bumblebees are part of the family Apidae. Apids also include honeybees and carpenter bees. And every bumblebee species is part of the same genus, which is Bombus. Worldwide, there are over 250 species of bumblebees. We have about 50 in North America, and we have 24 species documented in Colorado. Where I always kind of clarify those numbers with about or at least. There's taxonomic issues, so there's people that think these 2 species should be separate or these 2 species should be together. So there's a little bit of disagreement. And then just, there's some, as we do DNA analysis, finding out like, oh wow, those 2 are separate or those 2 should be together. And then still things being discovered. So again, if you think about that, 24 species in Colorado is half of the species of North America. Bumblebees, unlike many other native bees, are most diverse in cool montane environments. So Colorado is a really fun place to search for bumblebees and learn about bumblebees because diversity here is really high. When I tell people that I study bees, that I'm a native bee biologist, that I run the Bumblebee Atlas, almost always people start telling me stories about honeybees or honeys or honey or hives. And I love honey. Honeybees are also really fascinating, but that is not what I do. So I like to just take a little bit of time to just do a little compare and contrast to make sure that we understand why these two groups are so distinct. So both bumblebees and honeybees are excellent pollinators. They're both part of the same family. They both carry their pollen in the same way on that pollen basket on the hind leg, and both bumblebees and honeybees live in colonies. However, there's a lot of differences. So bumblebees, like I said, there's about 50 species in the United States. Honeybees are in the US, are European honeybees. Even though there's different breeds and there's lots of variation in their coloring, they're all the same species in the United States. Bumblebees are native to the United States, native to North America. Those 50 species are all from here. Honeybees are not native to North America. They came to the New World with colonists from Europe and Asia. So they were brought here for honey and to pollinate European crops, and they are not part of our native bee fauna. Um, Bumblebees are wild, while honeybees are typically in managed hives. They can swarm and there can be feral hives out in nature, but typically they don't last very long as feral hives in nature because there's so many pathogens, so much disease, that honeybees typically rely on those beekeepers to help them to survive from year to year. Um, Honeybees are hugely important in U.S. agricultural practices, which is why I think everybody knows about them. Because of the way that we do agriculture with like huge commercial fields, we need a lot of pollination in a short amount of time. Honeybees work for that because they are in these managed hives that can have thousands of bees, individuals in that hive at one time. So our U.S. agricultural practices rely very heavily on honeybees for pollination. Bumblebees, however, are also really excellent pollinators. For some plants, they're actually better pollinators than honeybees, and they pollinate native plants and crops as well. Even though you've heard about a lot of problems with honeybees, colony collapse disorder and pathogens and like save the bees, honeybees are not endangered. In 2023, there was 2.7 million hives in the United States. So it's not easy to be a beekeeper. There's a lot of disease. There's a lot of things that you have to manage, but they are not endangered. Well, 25% of our North American bumblebee species are known to have populations that are in decline. There are some species of bumblebees that are in danger of going extinct. So thinking about bumblebees, well, why? Why am I spending my time in my career right now as a Bumblebee Atlas coordinator? Why do I focus on bumblebees? And there's several reasons for this. When we think about teaching people about native bees, doing a community science project where we're trying to learn about pollinators and then have some on-the-ground conservation action, bumblebees are a really good species to start with because they're charismatic, they're easily recognizable. It's really easy to sell people on like why to love bumblebees because they're fluffy and they're adorable. This first picture is a little male Western bumblebee and he's got a little orange mustache there. Like they're so cute. So they're super easy to sell as like, hey, you should learn about them. These are really fascinating creatures. And they're also, because they're big, people are pretty familiar with them. So they're a great bee for people to start to learn about native bees and to join a community science project. They are interesting. They have really unique life cycle. They have some really unique adaptations that make them important pollinators. They're also active from early spring until late fall, which means that we can study them from early spring until late fall. We can observe them, and that's also why they're so well known because people can see them on the landscape all throughout the growing season. But it's also thinking about bumblebees are out on the landscape from spring to fall. That means that they're susceptible to negative things in their environment for that whole time. So it's like a good thing, and then it also could be a challenging thing for them. And we know that their populations are in decline. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. And then knowing that if we study bumblebees and we take action to conserve them, to restore habitats, to help them, any actions that we take for the bumblebees are going to help our other native pollinators as well. So let's talk about some of those unique adaptations that make bumblebees so awesome. So this is something that is very unique in the bee world, is this idea of living in a colony. A lot of people think that all bees live in hives, live in colonies, but really honeybees do and bumblebees do. Most other bees are solitary and don't have colonies, don't live in hives, don't have queens and workers. But bumblebees do. There's in a nest, in a colony, there's one queen who's the reproductive. There's multiple generations of workers that are all female daughters of the queen. And then at a certain time of year, there's males that are exist mostly just for reproduction. Bumblebees go through complete metamorphosis, just like butterflies do. So they start life as an egg, which is tiny, looks like a little grain of rice. That egg will hatch into a larva, which is not the most adorable stage of life. It's kind of a whitish, ugly looking grub. That larva goes through a feeding stage and grows, becomes pupa, where it goes through complete metamorphosis and emerges as an adult. Bumblebees nest in abandoned cavities, often underground, a lot of times in abandoned rodent burrows, so they won't excavate their own nest holes like some other bees actually will dig and create their nests. Bumblebees will take over a space that's already been excavated and will build their nests there. And this picture is showing what a bumblebee nest looks like. If you've seen pictures of honeybee colonies, you see those super organized hexagon shape and it looks just, so beautiful. And then you look here at the bumblebee nest, you're like, wow, that is a big old mess. But they have these wax cells. They can secrete wax and build those cells. Some that are filled with nectar that's basically honey. They don't build up as much honey as honeybees do, but they do have honey in some of these cavities. And then these other cells that are sealed are filled with pollen, nectar, and a developing immature, a egg, larva, or pupa is inside of there. You've got the queen there, and you've got a bunch of workers that are crawling around and caring for that nest. Bumblebees can also nest above ground. Sometimes they'll nest in the base of bunch grasses or in a place where there's a pile of sticks or a rock pile. They also have been known to nest in human structures like bird houses. Last summer in the Atlas, one of our volunteers, I think in Kansas, found bumblebees nesting in an old tractor on their property. So they will find a place that seems safe, and that's where they will build their nest. Typically, bumblebees are going to stay as close to the nest as they can as they're out foraging for pollen and nectar. They can go 275 to 750 meters, which is half a mile. They can travel further than that, but they don't really want to because it's all about being efficient and managing their energy. So they want to stay as close as possible so they don't waste energy in the flying and the foraging, and they can use their energy for supporting the colony. So bumblebees have an annual nest cycle, which is different from honeybees, where honeybees, that colony is perennial, that they persist over the winter. That's why they make so much honey, is that for them to survive the winter, and then they will kind of huddle together, keep that hive warm. That's different here for a bumblebee. So I'm going to just walk you through the nest cycle. When we think about winter, we're getting closer to the end of winter right now. Where are the bumblebees? There's hibernating queens. So underneath the ground, a couple inches deep in soil or leaf litter, or maybe in your compost pile, there's individual queen bees that are hibernating. They are not in a nest. They're not in a colony. It's just a little individual that buried herself in the ground and is hibernating. When the temperatures rise and spring arrives, we start to notice those queens waking up and flying around, and they're really obvious at that time of year because queen bumblebees are really big, and certain species are really, really big. And they're the one of the first bees to emerge in the spring, and so they're kind of the first ones that we see along with the first flowers. And so it's a really fun time of year when they start to emerge. The queens will immediately start looking for flowers because they've just been hibernating. So she's going to feed on nectar for energy. She's going to feed on pollen to help her ovaries develop. And then she's going to start searching for a nest site. And the searching looks like a bumblebee queen flying low to the ground and just kind of investigating different holes and cavities. So I've seen them, go into a hollow log and then come back out, go into a hole in the ground and come back out. They're looking for a space where they can build the nest. Once they find that space, she will work on establishing a nest, and this queen is still working by herself. There is no colony yet. It's just this one queen that emerged from hibernation, establishing this colony all on her own. So to establish her nest, her colony, she's going to secrete some wax and she's going to build a little waxen pot that she'll fill with nectar. And that's her little honey pot that's going to feed herself for the next several weeks. Then she'll create another cell out of wax and provision it with pollen and nectar, and she'll lay eggs into that. And then just like a bird sits on a nest and keeps its eggs warm, this bumblebee queen will sit on her eggs and she will incubate them, keep them warm while drinking out of her honey pot for the next couple weeks until that first generation of workers emerges. When those workers emerge, those are her daughters. They will take over all of the work of the colony. The queen from this point on is not going to leave the nest. Her only job from this point forward is laying eggs, is reproducing. The workers are going to go out and collect pollen nectar. They will care for the nest. They will take care of all of that. At the height of the summer, depending on the species of bumblebees and also the resources available, there could be 50 to a couple hundred bumblebees in that colony at the height of the summer. As it moves through the summer, we get into late summer and fall, the production of that nest is going to shift and no more workers are going to come out of that colony. It's going to instead be male bumblebees and new queens, next year's queens. So the males they have maybe a little bit of role in helping to thermoregulate the nest, but they're mostly for reproduction, so they will leave the nest. You'll see males on flowers in the late summer and fall, because they'll feed on nectar, they'll be watching for mates. And then these new queens will emerge, and they also will be feeding on nectar, and they will mate with the males. And the female can store that sperm in a specialized organ inside of her body until next spring when she needs it. And then she's going to forage to build up her fat reserves. And then she'll look for a place to hibernate, and the whole cycle will start again. As that new queen is finding a place to hibernate, the foundress queen, that original queen, is going to die. All of those workers die, the males die. That colony that just had that annual cycle is done. And when the new queens start a new colony the following spring, they'll find a new place. They won't go back to the same nesting site. They don't work with others. They start over from scratch and the whole cycle goes again. So what I just described is the normal life cycle of a bumblebee, but there is a subgroup of bumblebees that have a slightly different life strategy. These are the cuckoo bumblebees, which are social parasites. With the cuckoo bumblebees, there's no worker caste. There's only females, which we would call the queens, and males. And these females are going to come out of hibernation later in the summer after other species have already established their nest, have established their colonies. She'll come out of hibernation, she'll be feeding on nectar on flowers, and she'll also be searching for nest sites, but she's searching for established colonies. Then she's going to take over that colony. She's going to usurp the nest. She's going to kill the host queen. And then she tricks the workers of that colony into raising her offspring. And so those workers are out foraging, bringing pollen back, and what they're rearing, what they're taking care of is the offspring of this cuckoo female. And so at the end of the summer, what's going to come out of that nest are males and females of the cuckoo bumblebee, not the host bumblebee, not the original foundress of that colony. Cuckoo bumblebees are pretty, they kind of stand out when you see them out on the landscape, partly because the females are big, and most of the other bumblebees that you see at that time of year are smaller workers because the queens are already in and staying inside of their nests. So you see these large bumblebee females that are out on the landscape. They have big old heads and strong mandibles, mouth parts, because of their need to go in and take over a nest. They're kind of built for battle. They have an extra thick exoskeleton to protect them from the stinging of any bees in that nest that fight back. They have really strong stingers. And what's notable is they don't have a pollen basket. This is a female bee that does not have a pollen carrying structure because she doesn't need it. She's not going to go out and forage to collect pollen to feed to her offspring, to her larvae. She relies on the worker species, the worker bees of her host to do that. And so that's one way we can tell if a bumblebee is a cuckoo is we look to see if that female has a pollen basket or not. In Colorado, we have 4 species of cuckoo bumblebees with ranges that we know are here. The indiscriminate cuckoo bumblebee is the most common of those. The fernald cuckoo bumblebee is less common, but both of these first 2 were documented last summer as part of the Bumblebee Atlas, so they're both out there. The suckly cuckoo bumblebee and the variable cuckoo bumblebee, those 2 species are much more rare. Neither one of them has been seen for 10 years or so. And they have both been petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. Both of these also are host specific. So the suckly cuckoo bumblebee and variable cuckoo bumblebee, they have only 1 or 2 species that they will use as a host when they're taking over a nest, where other species like the indiscriminate cuckoo bumblebee is a little bit less picky. So if those host populations are declining, then it makes sense that our cuckoo bumblebee populations are declining as well. So the life cycle is something that makes bumblebees really unique, but there are some other things that just make them fascinating little animals. One of them is their ability to thermoregulate. Bumblebees are insects. They're cold-blooded. They're not supposed to be able to warm themselves up and manage their body temperature, but they actually can. Bumblebees have very large and strong thoracic flight muscles, so the flight muscles that are in their thorax, and they can use those for shivering to help warm themselves up when it's cold. This makes it possible for them to fly earlier in the day and later in the day, earlier in the spring and later in the fall, and also in colder climates. There are some bumblebee species known only from high elevations. There are some bumblebee species known only from high latitudes. Like there's some bumblebees known only from up near the Arctic Circle. And so they have been seen flying even in snow. They're not going to choose to go out and forage in snow, but they are able to warm themselves up and get back to their nests and just be able to survive in colder environments than other bees would be able to move around in. Another thing that's fascinating, and I love reading this kind of research because I like to imagine what it would be like to be in these labs, but there's research that scientists are doing about how bumblebees learn and how they learn socially. So there's 2 different studies that I'm going to reference it, basically where these scientists put together puzzles to see if bumblebees could solve the puzzles in order to get a nectar reward. One of them was they had to push a little ball into a hole, almost like playing pool for bumblebees. And then what's pictured here in this center picture, there's blue and red paddles, and the bumblebees had to learn to push the paddles in order to expose a nectar reward. And what the scientists learned is that the bumblebees learn best in a social learning environment. If they just put the bees in there, they had a hard time figuring out the puzzles. But if they had a little puppet bumblebee, like a little bumblebee on a stick, and that puppet taught them how to solve the puzzle, then they were able to do it. And then in this puzzle with the blue and the red, They trained two different colonies. One colony they trained to push the blue paddle, the other colony they trained to push the red paddle, and they found that individuals would follow what their colony's sisters taught them, instead of learning from the other colony. So they really learn from each other. And then there was even evidence that they would just push those balls around into the holes without getting a nectar reward. The the puzzles were moved away from the nectar and the bees were just allowed to go in there, and they seemed to just be pushing them around for what looked like fun. So the question is, are bumblebees playing? Possibly. So the more that we learn, we realize like these are way more complex of animals than we gave them credit for in the past, and there's just still so much to learn. And why does that kind of research matter? It helps us to understand what bumblebees are doing on the landscape. If you think about a bumblebee colony, and they have to be gathering pollen and nectar from early spring until late fall, the flowers in the environment change throughout that time. And they need to learn how to get the pollen and nectar from these different flowers. And it's more efficient, better for the colony if they can learn that quickly. And so learning from other bees on the landscape is going to help them to be more efficient. Another thing that bumblebees can do that honeybees can't do is buzz pollinate or sonicate. There are certain plants, like tomatoes and peppers, that benefit from buzz pollination because the pollen is held inside these poricidal anthers. And the way that that pollen gets extracted is for it to get rattled out. So this bumblebee grabs onto those anthers with her legs and with her mouth parts. And then she uses her thoracic flight muscles, those strong muscles in her thorax, and she vibrates them and just basically shakes that flower. And if you look carefully in this little video that's playing, that pollen just comes shooting out of that as she rattles it. You can hear this if there's a bumblebee that is buzz pollinating in your garden or out if you're out on a trail. When bumblebees fly, it's kind of a low-pitched zzz. But when they're buzz pollinating, you can hear it's a higher pitched zzz, zzz. And so if you hear that, you can start looking around to see, where is that bumblebee? What is she buzz pollinating? So that's something that's really important especially for certain types of plants. So those are all really fun things about bumblebees and why they're so awesome, but we have some conservation concerns about bumblebees, so let's talk about those. About just over 10 years ago, there was a bumblebee specialist group that was formed by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they went through this pretty intensive process of doing species status assessments for every species of bumblebee in North America, looking at past data, looking at things that are known about habitat, floral host, and all of that, and assessing what is their risk of extinction. The graph that's on the screen right now is showing the results of that work that was published, like I said, about 10 years ago. And the good news is this green. There are 28 species that are of least concern. Those populations seem to be okay. And in some cases, those populations even seem to be expanding their ranges. There were 5 species that were classified as data deficient. These are some rarer species where there just wasn't enough information to make a determination. But what caught the researchers' eye and that we're concerned about is all of these reds and oranges and yellows. 25% of those 46 species that were assessed are facing some threat of extinction. So these are the populations that we are really concerned about and interested in learning more about. In Colorado, of our 24 species, again, 25% of them are in one of these threatened or endangered categories. We have 6 species of conservation concern here in Colorado. So the western bumblebee, American bumblebee, and Morrison bumblebee are all classified as vulnerable. The southern plains bumblebee, which its range extends just up until the front range, so it's in eastern Colorado, is classified as endangered. And these are those 2 cuckoos that I was talking about, the Suckly cuckoo bumblebee and the variable cuckoo bumblebee. Those are classified as critically endangered. All 6 of these species, based on those species status assessments, have been petitioned to the Fish and Wildlife Service to placed under the protection of the Endangered Species Act, and they're in process of being assessed for that protection. So, of course, we want to do something to help them, but a big question that comes up is like, why? Why is that happening? And there's no one answer to what's causing the declines of bumblebee species. It's a kind of a suite of factors all working together. Everything that's here on this slide, it plays a part. So a big piece of this is habitat loss and fragmentation. Bees need flowers, nesting sites, and overwintering sites, and a lot of our human landscapes don't have those. From large agricultural fields to cities and roads, and green lawns in suburbs. There's a lot of habitat loss that has happened, and also the loss of connectivity between populations where there's might be little pockets of good habitat. They have lost the connectivity, which means they have lost the ability to have genetic diversity. Another issue is pathogens from commercial bees. Pathogens, diseases from honeybees can spread into wild bee populations, but this is also a concern with commercially raised bumblebees. There are bumblebee colonies that are raised in facilities to be sent to greenhouses to help pollinate certain crops. And sometimes they escape, and there have been instances where they have spread some of their pathogens to wild bee populations and caused some declines. Our landscape is also full of lots of different chemicals. All sorts of pesticides are sprayed onto plants and the ground. Knowing that bees feed on plants and live in the ground, that is a concern. Herbicides and fungicides are definitely an issue, and insecticides kill every insect, so that can kill bees as well. There's also competition from commercial bees. Honeybees are important, like I mentioned, to agriculture. They're fascinating, they're important, they make honey, all of these things. But one honeybee hive at the peak of its season could have 50 to 80,000 individuals out foraging on the landscape. And that number of honeybees can outcompete native bees, including bumblebees, especially in places with limited floral resources. And finally, climate change. When there's higher temperatures, these cooler weather organisms like bumblebees can't forage as well. When there's drought, there's no flowers that are available. Storms and fires, all of these things are affecting the landscape and causing challenges for our native bee populations. So that's like not great news, but the good news is that this is something that everyone can take action to help with. Bumblebees, like I said, with the colony cycle, it's really important for there to be flowers from early spring when those queens emerge from hibernation until the late fall where the new queens are building up their fat stores for hibernation and the whole time in between. So if you're gardening, planting flowers with a variety of bloom times is really important. So there's always something in bloom. And flowers is not all that bees need. They also need nesting sites and overwintering sites. So that just means leaving a little bit of your yard or garden a little bit messy so that there can be a rock pile or a stick pile or some decomposing leaves where these animals can build their nests and have a safe place for hibernation. The best habitat is chemical free. So thinking about if and when to use pesticide, especially when creating pollinator habitat. And then all of our native pollinators, including bumblebees, need advocates to share what you know about the diversity of bees, the challenges that they're facing, and what everybody can do to help. This is where the Xerces Society has a lot of really great resources about building habitat. There's also a ton of really great resources here in Colorado, from the Native Plant Society to master gardeners, the extension offices. There's just so much great information out there. And then also visiting local nurseries is a really great way to learn about how to create habitat for bumblebees and other pollinators. These are some of the plant lists that Xerces has produced. that shows some really great pollinator and beneficial insect plants specifically for different regions with their bloom times. I know that there's also plant guides that the Native Plant Society has produced as well that are super helpful. But sometimes people want to do a little bit more or than just planting flowers, and that's what the Bumblebee Atlas is all about. This is a chance for people to help bumblebees on a larger scale, because before we can really help them, we need to know where they are, which habitats they're using, and which flowers they're depending on. Bumblebees are small. They're not really easy to find or to study, and their ranges are huge. Their ranges cover states or entire regions. And so we don't know exactly where they all are, what these different species need for overwintering and nesting habitat. So there's just a lot that we need to learn, a lot of data that we need to collect. And so that's what the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas is meant to do. Our goal is to use community science to find, photograph, and map our native bumblebee species, learning where are they, what flowers are they using, what types of habitats are they relying on, so that we can prioritize conservation action. We can prioritize places where we should focus our efforts. The Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas started last year in 2024, and it covers the states of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. And so we're building this network of community scientists that are looking for and documenting bumblebees, and also connecting with community members, sharing what we know, and educating our neighbors about the importance of these native pollinators. Like I said, this is a really fun place to learn about and look for bumblebees. Across the 4 states of this project area, there's 30 different species that are possible. Some of them are really common and found across all 4 states. Some are only found in certain places. Some are really rare. Like I said, those 2 species of cuckoo bumblebees haven't been seen in 10 years. So it's just, there's a lot that we can learn about all of these species and where they are found in our region, so we can figure out what we can do to help them specifically in our region. This map is showing what we knew before the atlas started. So all of these dots on this map are bumblebee observations since the year 2000. Some of these are museum records. So when entomologists go out and collect insects and pin them and put them in collections to study them, some of these are those kinds of records. A lot of these dots are iNaturalist records, people going out and using the iNaturalist app to document what they see. And because of that, this data is pretty biased. You can see where population centers are. Like, oh, there's Reno, there's Salt Lake City, there's Denver in the Front Range. You can tell there's lots of people that visit Yellowstone and Grand Teton. So if you look at this map, you're like, oh, wow, it looks like bumblebees like to be in cities. But that's not really the case. This is where the people are, so that's where most of our observations are. The goal of the atlas is to learn about all of these spaces in between. We want to fill in these gaps. You can see we've divided this map into these squares. We want to survey and learn about bumblebees in every single one of those squares, so we can get a more accurate picture of what's happening with these species in nature. Like I said, there's 3 main questions about where are our bumblebees now, all of these 30 species that could be here. Where are they? What habitats are they using? And what flowers are they relying on? And we want to gather this data on a large scale so that we can analyze it, and then use it to make recommendations for some on-the-ground decisions in the future. This work is not possible without volunteers, so this is a community science project where everyone is welcome to join. We have some biologists from BLM and Forest Service and Colorado Parks and Wildlife that are helping us. But there's also just so many people just like you that are engaging in this work, that want to help bumblebees and are excited to learn and to give it a try. And this is not possible without volunteers. If I tried to gather this amount of data, it would take me years or decades. But we're going to be able to do it in just a couple of years with this huge network of volunteers that we're building across our region. Since we do send our volunteers out to actually catch bumblebees, they catch them with a net and then they put them on ice, which seems a little weird, but they put them on ice to chill them so they slow down, but it doesn't kill them. But then it makes it possible for the volunteer to take really good pictures up close and personal with that bee so we can identify the bee to species from the pictures. So that's what we ask our volunteers to do. So it's important that our volunteers get trained in how to do that safely and to be confident in doing that. So we have a standardized protocol that we train our volunteers on. Volunteers can attend a live training webinar or watch a recorded video from a training webinar. They can read the participant handbook or they can attend a full day in-person workshop. Those will happen across the region throughout the spring and summer. Our website also has a lot of other resources available to help build capacity and build confidence as our volunteers are learning how to become volunteers. After they have been trained, each volunteer adopts a grid cell. So across the 4-state region, we have 371 grid cells. Each grid cell is about 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers. And we ask our volunteers to adopt it, which means they're kind of claiming that grid cell and saying, sometime during this summer, I'm going to go out twice and conduct a survey in that grid cell. And like I said, our goal is to cover all of those grid cells. We want to have at least 2 surveys in every grid cell by the end of the 2026 field season. The colors on this map show different starting dates because we have pretty big climate diversity across the region. So pretty soon in southern Nevada, they're going to start being able to do surveys on April 1st. All of the yellow starts on May 1st, and those higher elevation, higher latitude places start on June 1st. Then our volunteers go out and conduct surveys. This is the most fun part. So they go out and they net bumblebees that they see. They carefully place them into vials. They put those vials in a cooler on ice, and that knocks out the bumblebees like you can see in this last picture. So it's much easier to photograph an immobilized bumblebee than one that's trying to fly away. Depending on the weather, the volunteer has from 3 to 5 minutes or so before that bumblebee warms up and flies away to get good pictures of that specimen. And this makes it possible for us to learn about bumblebees across the region without having to lethally capture them. We don't have to kill bumblebees and pin them and put them in museums. If we get good pictures from our volunteers, we can identify them to species from those pictures. And then our volunteers go to bumblebeewatch.org, which is our data management website, and they upload their pictures. They upload survey data where they record the flowers that were in bloom, where they were, the type of habitat. And then at Xerces, we go through and we identify all those bumblebees. We compile those data and can use them to create reports and recommendations and share with land management partners in order to really take action on the ground to help these bumblebee species. So we finished our first field season last year, and in our first year we got a start. So 68 of our grid cells were adopted and 177 surveys were conducted. During those surveys, volunteers found over 800 bumblebees, and we found 21 species. 4 of our 6 conservation target species were observed across the region in 2024. You can see we still have a lot of ground to cover. So we're working on spreading the word, building momentum this year, and really getting volunteers out there to survey. And then we have this year and then 2026 where we really want to fill in those gaps. If you're interested in joining the Atlas, you are, of course, welcome to join. Just last week, I had a training webinar for volunteers last Tuesday night, and that was recorded. So if you're ready, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to join, you can go to the Xerces YouTube channel and you can watch the training webinar from last week. But there will also be, oh, let's not watch it now. There's also going to be another training webinar if you'd like to join us live on April 23rd. You can go to the Bumblebee Atlas website and register for that webinar and join in live in person so you can have a chance to ask questions if you're interested in learning more about how to become a volunteer for the Bumblebee Atlas. And there's also just a lot of resources on our Atlas website to share information if you or someone that you know is interested in taking part. Also, if you want to become a volunteer or if you just want to like learn more and see how this works, these are in-person training events that are going to be happening across the 4 states of this region this summer. It's a big region. I'm going to be very busy. But you can see if there's an event happening near you. A field training is hands-on. So I was speaking to someone before we started that I'm going to be at the Crested Butte Wildflower Festival in July. And we're going to just do a hands-on training. So we'll have nets, we'll catch some bumblebees, we'll put them on ice, and I'll show you how to take pictures of them. And it's just a great way to get to know some of the bumblebees that live in your neighborhood. So if there's an event near you and you're interested, come on out and join us. So that is our website, bumblebeeatlas.org, is where you can go to learn more about the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas and also our Atlas projects that are happening. We're in 20 different states, so you can see all of the work that we're doing collaboratively across the U.S. Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas at Xerces.org is the project email. If you email that email address, I will get your message and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. We also, I think, Maggie, we have time for questions tonight. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. That was super interesting. Are there any questions? None have developed in the chat yet.
I was excited to see that you saw a bumblebee today. Yay, first queen of the year.
It wasn't, I mean, it was not as dark as all the ones. It wasn't really orange and black or yellow and black. It was like orange and tan or yellow and tan. So maybe I was
Interesting.
wrong.
It could have been a different kind of bee, but that's cool. Oh,
Yeah.
Carrie, I see your question. Can we specify a donation to Xerces to go to the Atlas project? That is a great question that I probably should know the answer to. If you go to the Xerces.org website and go to contact us, there is a donation team where you can reach out to them. Because I don't manage the donations, but you can say that you want to make a donation specifically for the Bumblebee Atlas, and they will be able to help you. We have a really great membership team. Colorado native plants that bumblebees like. Ooh, bumblebees are generalists, so they will use pretty much anything that's on the landscape. Lupin is one that I see them on all the time. Of course, Rocky Mountain bee plant is a good one. They love thistles, native thistles. They will also use non-native thistles. They'll use the non-native flowers if they are available. I'm gonna blank on anything else, but there are like if you go to the Xerces website and look at those pollinator plants, there's a bunch of them that are listed. Claire, are you limiting the cells that are surveyed in Colorado this year? Last year, all of the survey cells were open. We are not limiting the cells in Colorado, but we have prioritized 75% of our grid cells. So of our 371 grid cells, 75% of them are considered high priority. And so they are on the maps, they're shown differently. And those are the grid cells that we're really encouraging people to go to. There's a whole bunch of our grid cells that have 0 bumblebee records ever. And we have records from museum going back to the 1800s. And there's some places, especially in Colorado, in eastern Colorado, where nobody has ever recorded a bumblebee. And so those grid cells where we have very little data are prioritized. Grid cells where we have relatively recent records of our conservation target species are prioritized. But people can submit surveys from any place in Colorado, from any grid cell, and we will take them. Does the Atlas use an iNaturalist observation at this point? iNaturalist is a great way to give incidental observations. You can also submit incidental observations to Bumblebee Watch, bumblebeewatch.org. So you can take a picture and submit it to iNaturalist. You can take a picture and submit it to Bumblebee Watch. Both of those are valuable. Um, and if you submit something to iNaturalist, you don't have to submit it to Bumblebee Watch as well. All of those records go to one North American bumblebee database that we at Xerces and other researchers look at. So either one of those would be fine. But we do want to encourage people to do surveys because the surveys have this standardized protocol where we are recording the effort that goes into these bumblebee observations. So on iNaturalist, we can get good information like, ooh, that's a bee. It was in this location on that plant on this day and time, and that's valuable. But what we can get by doing surveys is we can tell, oh, somebody spent 45 minutes and found one bumblebee, or somebody spent 45 minutes and found 20 bumblebees, or someone spent 45 minutes looking for bumblebees and didn't find any at all. And that effort data, that survey data is valuable in helping us to be able to form some conclusions about population and population changing over time. All right. Let's see. What kind of outreach are we doing in the empty grid cells? That's a great question. So I have been working to spread the word by doing presentations like this for different groups. I'm working on getting information out to different news outlets. But we really rely on word of mouth for people to, spread the word because that's the best way for these kinds of projects to spread. And then encouraging, we have some volunteers that are part of the Atlas that are like, where can I go that I can do, where can I go that you really need me? And so sending some of those really zealous volunteers to the empty grid cells. And also we're working to partner with biologists with different agencies. So we're funded by the BLM. We're working on a partnership with CPW. We are supported, like not financially, but just supported by the Forest Service. And so their biologists are getting trained in Atlas protocols. So when they go out to some of these remote places where we don't have data, they can collect data for us as well. So looking for those kinds of partnerships as well to help us to fill those empty grid cells. Oh yeah, trying to think how our different CONUTS chapters could help contribute to the project. That would be fantastic. And Maggie kind of mentioned at the beginning about, maybe having that be a chapter event that you can do the training together and you can go out and do surveys together because it's definitely more fun to do a survey with other people. And thinking about, I know that Native Plant Societies folks like to go out and look at plants. And when you're looking at really unique plants, you're probably going to see unique bees. So if you go out and do seed collecting or a plant hike, then maybe adding a little bit of time to do a bumblebee survey would be a fantastic way to help the project. Oh yes, extension offices. We have made some connections with them and they've helped us. It's all about connections. Definitely. Thank you. Ooh, what is my favorite bumblebee species? Oh man, that's such a great question. I started learning about bumblebees, like I told you, in Montana when I was studying huckleberries. And I spent that first summer doing field work in way northwestern Montana. So I was almost in Canada. And up there are like the higher elevation forest bumblebees have a lot of black hairs mixed into their yellow. My friend called them those dirty bumblebees, where like bumblebees that are, more in the plains and lower elevations, that their yellow is more yellow, not mixed with black. So some of those forest mixed with black bumblebees are my favorite. Bombus mixtus and Bombus melanopygus are the fuzzy-horned bumblebee and the black-tailed bumblebee are two of my favorites. So I haven't gotten a tattoo of either of them yet, but I have considered it. Awesome. Yeah, Bumblebee Watch, like Xerces the Bumblebee Watch is managed by Xerces and our Bumblebee Atlas team. And so in states where there is an atlas, a human person at Xerces looks at every Bumblebee Watch observation. iNaturalist uses AI, and then sometimes, a lot of times, you've got researchers that are on there verifying observations. But we at Xerces, we kind of watch both because we're interested in seeing where people are seeing bumblebees and when. That helps us to find sites for surveys and also just to know what's going on. Thanks for sharing that. Ooh, Claire, that's a great question. How do you put bumblebees on ice if you're hiking to high altitudes? What can you pack in besides ice? Um, that is a good question and a tricky question because what we found is some of like those lighter weight gel packs or blue ice are actually too cold that they can kill the bees. They super chill them. So we don't want to use those. But if you're going high enough and there's snow, you can put the vials in the snow to chill them down. I have done some, like I haven't gone real high with a backpack cooler, but it's adding a lot of weight if you're hiking with a cooler of ice. But it doesn't have to be a big cooler, it could just be small. But that is, um, yeah, that's a good question and something that we think about. Um, some volunteers that have gone on hikes to really high elevations where there wasn't any snow for chilling the bees to do an actual survey, they just took pictures as best as they can with as incidental observations and then added them as incidental observations on Bumblebee Watch instead of doing formal surveys. Oh yeah, an insulated coffee cup would work for sure. hmm if there's enough room. Yeah, depends on how many bees you catch. Sometimes a survey has one bee or 5 bees, or I've been in some mountain meadows where I've had 30 bees that were caught. But yeah, have to get creative with that. But if you're high enough, then trying to utilize snow might be a good option. Yeah. Great questions. Thanks for asking and participating.